Okay, so we've got the king, we've got the pawns, we've got the bishops. Let's add some rooks onto this board. We've got the white rooks on h1 and a1, and we're going to throw two more of them on there, h8 and a8 for the dark. And we've got our all-powerful rooks. People refer to them as a castle, but even though they look like a castle, castle is a whole different term. So we call them a rook. R-O-O-K. It's a rook. And you'll like this guy, man. He's a pretty strong guy. Remember I told you that the pawns were worth 1 point? Well, and I told you that the king had infinite value. I mean, meaning that there's not a way to put a number on how much this guy is worth because he's like worth everything. It goes on and on. Well, the bishop is worth 3 points, and this rook, this guy is worth 5 points in the game, okay? All right, so let's look at how this rook moves. If there were no other pieces on the board, we would take this rook, and we would see that this guy moves in straight lines, just like this. He moves vertically and horizontally as many spaces as he wants. So this guy, he could come down here and he can grab one of those pawns and he can go over here and say check to the king because he'd be threatening him because he could move in his next move and the king could then take him if he was that close. Of course, that's what I would do if I was the king. I don't know what you would do, but that's what I would do. But let's take this other king over here. Let's take this white rook. And let's imagine that he was in the middle of the board already. He had the same power too. I mean, this guy could come over, that king said, or the bishop say, hey man, you're close to me, I can take you. All right? But let's put these pieces back on the board and let's show how they really can get into this game because unfortunately they can't really jump over pieces either. Just like that bishop, they're caught up in the corner until they can get back into the game. We don't want to put a black pawn, a white pawn over there. That'd be a bad situation for him. But let's move this king back to where he's supposed to go, and let's put this white pawn back on e2. And let's see what it takes for this king to get into the game. Well, we know that the king moves in a straight line, so we got to get these pawns out of their way. So let's see. If I'm on white, I'm going to make some space for my rook over here. And black is saying the same thing. Hey, I want to move and get mine in. And white says, oh, okay, well, I'm going to move this one so my other one can get in. And this guy said, hey, I'm going to move my pawn so I can get my rook into the game too. Oh, okay, that's good. Well, we're ready to do some battle because this rook can now move out here. And this one can move over here. And this guy can get into the game from here. And this one might want to move over here, and he says, hey, I'm going to move over here and threaten to come down here and take some pieces. And this guy said, no, you're not, because I'm going to stand right in the front of you, right? Well, this guy might say, hey, I can move forward and capture here, and then this rook could slide over here and take a piece, and then this guy could move over here, and black could say, hey, I can take that piece, and the pawn says, hey, I'm going to jump into the game and take over here, right? So we're starting to see how that rook has the ability to move around, but he's vulnerable to attack also. Got it? So what we want to do is we want to practice moving that rook around the board, and we can see what he's capable of doing. But let me show you something real fast. Let's set the board back up. Okay, now that we got things back in order, I want to show you a special relationship that the king and the rook have, right? The king and the rook have a special kind of relationship. It's called a castling relationship. So one of the things that we want to do really early in our game is we want to open up some space for our bishops to get into the game, right? And we want to clear out some space in between the king and the king. Once we've got some space cleared between them, they can do what we call a castle. This is a king-side castle. It's actually one move. If it's white's move, this king can move 2 spaces over, and the rook can move 2 spaces over to the other side. He's not really moving 2 spaces over. He's really just kind of jumping to the other side of the king. And that's called a castle. That's really kind of an advantage for us because that king is kind of tucked away in the safe little space behind these pawns, and he likes being over here in the corner. Well, this one's got, hey, he's got some space in between. He hasn't moved his king, and he hasn't moved his rook, and there's nothing really threatening the squares in between, so this guy can do that too. And that's called a castle, right? I told you we're going to move through this pretty quickly, but I want to introduce you to that, and maybe we'll come back to that later. But that's a special relationship between the rook and the king that they have. If you haven't moved either of them before, and there's some space in between them, then they can castle. We move the king over towards the rook, 2 spaces, and the king and the rook jumps on the other side of the king for a castle. And that's the only time that you can move 2 pieces at one time. Congratulations.